Mandala. Yeah, okay. It's auspicious to start with the mandala, I think. And the mandala is a nice little tradition. It's really, it's just very meaningful. So I think you can start with that one. You as the center, so ocean of compassion. You're going to offer a mandala to request the teachings. It's so you know, you can do like that. That's auspicious. And then I will sing the refuge and bodhichitta prayer. That's all we need to do. That's okay. And have Shakyamuni Buddha in your heart. All right. We won't say his praises and things, but yeah. So so what we're thinking is just thinking, like, you know yourself, if you go somewhere, you don't go empty-handed, do you? It's got great meaning. You go with something. You bring a bottle, you bring a vase of flowers or a cake if you go visiting. Well, it's like that. It's like offering. And here, in fact, it's this mandala, very Tibetan tradition, but it's got great meaning. You're visualizing all the marvelous things of the world. Your mind is the point. And you imagine offering to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. So it has great meaning, requesting something, you know. So you don't go and say, give me an ice cream and not give you money, isn't it? You think about it. Give me an ice cream. You wouldn't say that. You give you money and you get your ice cream. It's like that. The Buddha's not expecting it. It's all right. So you do the mandala. Imagine, just use your creative imagination and imagine all the marvelous things of the world that make beings happy, basically, which is the objects of the senses, offer to the Buddha as a request for the teachings.
So this would be on the page 87.
And do it in English. It's nice to say the words.
This ground anointed
with
strewn with flowers, adorned with mountains, war continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this would feel offering.
And you imagine Buddha delightedly receiving our offering. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. So now the refuge and bodhicitta prayer, that's there. You got that one? I'll lead that one. Yeah, I'll lead that one. Okay, so this one, the first two lines are expressing our reliance on the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So if you feel like you're already a Buddhist, so you reiterate that in your mind, taking refuge, in other words. And the second two lines are expressing what the Tibetans would say is our motivation for doing this activity of sitting here together, listening to the teachings. We mightn't use that term. We'd say, what's your purpose? What's your goal? Why are we here? It's very logical. Why are you here? We're here to listen, including me, I promise, to these ideas, these viewpoints coming from the Buddha. And as we know, coming from in the Tibetan tradition, through the mouths of the holy beings in Tibet, tracking back to India, these ideas about life, reality, happiness, suffering, and in this case, specifically compassion. And why are we listening? This is the point. Why? Well, it's advice, basically. It's a crucial thing. It's advice. It's not just intellectual information you fill your head with. To hear if there's any advice there. So, of course, you don't have to take it. Buddha's not the boss. It's not like he's forcing you to believe it, you know. You don't swallow it whole. You listen. And if there's something reasonable, you take it on board. That's the attitude towards it. So we're thinking we're listening to these teachings so we can get some tools to develop our amazing potential so we can be of benefit to the world like that. That's why we're here together. So we sing this little prayer. We can do it, I think, in Tibetan one time, and then we can you say the English 2 times, Bay. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyapsuchi dagi chonyen gipe sonam ki jola penche sangye dropa shok. One more time. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyapsuchi dagi chonyen gipe sonam ki jola penche sangye dropa shok. And one time in English, Bay.
Refuge to enlightenment, to the Buddha, by the merits and grace of listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to.
Okay, good. Oh, I forgot to put my hearing aids in. I just got hearing aids. It's in these big situations I need them. So if I keep going like this, you'll know. Just speak loudly. I'm sorry, I forgot. Okay, so compassion. I think one of the things that draws people, I think, to a spiritual path is this idea of compassion or love, you know, connected to others. That's very common. But what's curious in this path, the way the Buddhism is structured very clearly in terms of the capacity of the disciple, just like in any body of knowledge that you'd learn, you know, you don't leap into E = MC². You start with 1 + 1 = 2, and you go gradually. Well, that's very much, certainly the Tibetan tradition, the way that all the Buddha's body of knowledge, all the worldview of Buddhism is presented, you know. So from that perspective, compassion is more advanced, which is curious, but there's logic to it. And that's what I'm trying to get to today, to show the logic of why. And there's a nice analogy: a bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. And as the Dalai Lama says, you know, compassion is, you can say it's the point, but it's not enough. You've got to have wisdom. As Lama Zopa puts it, meaning well is not enough. You need wisdom. So wisdom sounds a very grand word, but it's got crucial meaning in the Buddhist approach to life. But broadly speaking, or simply speaking, wisdom just means common sense. Wisdom just means being in touch with what's real. And this is crucial to understand from the Buddhist perspective, because he's saying we're living in la la land. If we're in samsara, quote unquote, we're living in la la land in relation to reality, how things exist. And there's levels of existence as far as Buddha is concerned. There's very obvious, evident levels of things existing. And then there's the more subtle ones that are the crucial points in Buddhism, you know, the idea about how things exist ultimately. And then the flip side of that being dependent arising. So all the Buddha's teachings lead to this, is the wisdom teachings lead to this. But the point that Buddha is making is that, that these neuroses in our mind, these delusions, which have a characteristic of being misconceptions, they're conceptual stories, they're conceptual stories that inform these emotions like attachment and anger, these simple words. He says they're driving us right now. What he means by being in samsara is being a person who's caught up in these, driven by these. So what the key thing that they prevent from one's own point of view is one's own happiness, because they make you miserable. They're called, you know, disturbing emotions for evident reason. But the other thing is they blind us. They disconnect us from others. They cut us off from others and the world. They blind us from seeing things clearly, quite literally that. So the key job then from the wisdom point of view, the wisdom wing point of view, with the first stages of practice in Buddhism, is to work on your own mind, to sort yourself out, to recognize these delusions, these neuroses, these misconceptions deep in the bones of our being, to identify them and see how they cause you suffering and how they then cause you to misconceive the world. As Lama Zopa says, you know, these delusions, what they do is they cause the outside world to appear back to us wrongly. So this might be surprising to us. You know, we think when you're angry, you would not think you're having a misconception. But that's just that's the emotional component. But as we start to become familiar with our minds and dig deep and drill down into our mind, into the anger itself, past the emotion, beyond the emotion, we're going to get to see there are these conceptual stories that we're totally programmed with, that are totally based on I, totally based on an unreasonable sense of an I, an exaggerated, distorted sense of a concrete, separate, bereft, lonely, unhappy I, and then gives rise to intense attachment to get what that I wants, which then gives rise to aversion, the panic attack of aversion when it doesn't get what it wants, and all the other dramas that are rooted in this. It's a very clear presentation in Buddhist psychology, the way these poisons, as Buddha sweetly talks about them, these neurotic misconceptions. So removing, at the first stages of practice, beginning to unpack and unravel these misconceptions, identify them, and then argue with them, reconfigure the way you see the world, lessening the stories of attachment, aversion, jealousy, and depression. First the emotional component, and then the actual conceptual component, which is really hard work. The consequence of this is, one, you become more relaxed and more easygoing, and you become more wise, quite literally. And the wisdom here specifically is related to your connection with others. So the Four Noble Truths, Buddha's first teaching, one way of framing the whole Buddhist path is in terms of suffering. So his Four Noble Truths, the four truths, four facts about life for the noble ones. The truths aren't necessarily noble. The first teaching he gave is a presentation of suffering. So first there is suffering, he says, and there's different levels of it. And this is vital to understand, because when you look at what compassion is empathy for the suffering of others, empathy for others who are suffering. So if you don't know what suffering is, which you learn in junior school, the wisdom wing, how can you possibly have empathy for others? How can you have compassion? Compassion is defined by suffering, you know. So you've got to see it first in yourself. And this is the Four Noble Truths. So there is suffering, different levels of it. And to understand the levels to which we can have compassion, the compassion of the bodhisattvas, this courageous compassion, we need to understand these three levels of suffering, but oneself. In the Four Noble Truths, Buddha's not talking to your wife or your girlfriend. The commonest thing that happens when you come to the teachings is, oh, I wish my boyfriend was here. He needs to hear this. No, Buddha's talking to us. It's for us to look at, you know. He's talking to oneself. He's talking to us. So the first one is there is suffering, and there are three levels. The second one is there are causes. The third is, guess what? You can be free of suffering and its causes. And fourth, the methodology, how to do it. It's very practical. And we all know if there's in general in your life, if there's a problem, you first have to identify precisely the problem. You have to label it accurately. But the crucial point is surely you have to then work out what the causes are. Because once you've established the causes of a problem, it infers the solution. So this is the presentation of Buddha's view of how to stop suffering. So the accomplishment of the wisdom wing is the accomplishment of the cessation of suffering and its causes. Because you stop your suffering, but you also get in touch with reality. That you stop the things that block, that make you miserable and that block you from seeing how things are. Because these delusions misrepresent the world back to us. So, okay, if you want to get compassion, in general, I think in the world, I've heard that people use in psychology, they use empathy as one definition and compassion with another. Well, Buddhism effectively they're the same. There's compassion is defined as, it starts with being a concept, a thought. You see suffering? Oh my gosh, look at that suffering. May you not suffer. That's compassion. So the Buddha is saying is we can develop this to limitless degrees. But the point here is the suffering that we refer to when we say we have compassion is only the first kind. There are three levels. So back to the first noble truth, the first kind of suffering, as far as Buddha is concerned, is called the suffering of suffering. And that we get. And it's basically when the bad things happen. Think about it. When the bad things happen, that's suffering. And that's the only one we recognize. The second kind of suffering is a bit depressing for us because it's what Buddha refers, it's what we refer to as happiness. When we get when the nice things happen. But for the Buddha, it's a more nuanced level of suffering. And that we need to really understand this technically, logically, if we want to understand what Buddha's on about. You know? And the third kind is even more abstract for us. They call it all pervasive suffering, conditioned suffering. So the wisdom wing is the accomplishment of the understanding of all of these and the cessation of all of these for yourself. So once you've accomplished that, if you do that wisdom wing first, then it is easy to look outside and go, oh my God, we're all in the same boat, because you recognize everyone else. But you've got to see your own self first. And I think this is very logical. If you see people who are fat and unhealthy, and you can have compassion for them, but rushing off to help them is foolish. That's foolish. You need wisdom, which means you should learn nutrition yourself first. It's very obvious. So compassion is not enough. It's quite literally true. It's not enough. And the way we have compassion now is quite sentimental. It can be quite sentimental and unstable because it's driven by attachment. Okay, so if we want to, so let's look at the three kinds of suffering. Even the first two is enough already. No, the three kinds altogether. The first kind of suffering is the suffering of suffering, Buddha calls it, which is when the bad things happen. So if we take Buddha's analysis in the second noble truth, there are causes of suffering. And this is where it's a bit shocking to us, because as far as we are concerned, it's the boyfriend and the weather and the politics that are the cause of my suffering. But for the Buddha, yeah, they play a role, but they're not the main players. This is the crucial point about all of Buddha's path. The main players in one's own suffering and happiness is oneself. This is the big shock. And so there are two main causes of suffering. And this is where we really can present the teachings about cause and effect. And we can see that we're good at this. In our world, we're genius. We're scientists. We're good at cause and effect. The logic of what causes something. Once you get it down, what causes a tree, a rose, you'll get a rose every time. It's very clear. So here we're discussing a moment of suffering. And flip it over, it also refers to a moment of happiness. The same logic applies. So this first kind of suffering, the suffering of suffering when the bad things happen. So I've got my boyfriend, let's say, say Doug, poor Doug is my boyfriend. And, he punches me in the nose, very simply. So it's fairly evident if I'm crying, and what's wrong, Robina? Why are you suffering? It's obvious. My answer will be very simple, and you won't be arguing with me. Doug punched me in the nose. Why are you suffering? I hurt my toe. Why are you suffering? I'm hungry. This is clear to us. And what is not saying it's not true. It just says we over exaggerate the power of the external phenomena. This is the key point in the whole Buddhist approach. The mind is the main player. The mind is the main player, which means here, what it means is the mind is the main player. It means the way we interpret something, our interpretation of it. So the first kind of suffering is when the bad things happen. So if we recognize it's a problem, let's say you stub your toe, simple example, and you don't like it, then you have to first identify the problem, and then you have to identify the cause of that pain, which is you stubbed your toe. So then the solution is you try to stop stubbing your toe. It's pretty clear. So here the suffering is having bad things happen. And of course we're talking the big picture view here, not just, the world being a horrible place, terrible things happening to us, not to mention the Buddha's view about suffering rebirths, even forget that one. But even just in this life, bad things happening to us. So to understand, we recognize it as suffering because we don't want it. It's a simple way of putting. It's what attachment doesn't want. So we have to understand that's the problem. So then we have to find the causes. Well, the causes, as far as Buddha is concerned, are two main ones, and they're both inside me. One is called karma, which is I must have punched Doug in the nose. Speaking really simplistically in the past. And second, the delusion in the mind that drove my action to harm him. Those two are the main causes of this event now when I get the punch. Speaking simply, speaking simply. So this means we have to understand karma. So again, to have compassion, if we want to have compassion for others who get punched, it's the same analysis. You've got to do the analysis for yourself first. So this means we have to understand the Buddha's view of karma, which is the Buddhist view about the mind. These are fundamentals, So one, the mind for the Buddha is not physical. Two, it is inextricably linked to the brain, to the physical, but only the gross level, because Buddha would assert subtler levels of cognition. And this is coming from these genius Indians more than 3,000 years ago, well before the Buddha. They're the ones who discovered this in their development of this brilliant technique called concentration, samadhi. They developed this marvelous technique that enables one to plumb the depths of our mind, to go beyond the conceptual and the sensory levels, which are they're the only levels we posit in our world, and to go to these more subtle levels of cognition, where we can really do the work of unpacking and unraveling this mind of ours and sorting it out and developing this wisdom, removing from it the neurotic states of mind that are the source of our suffering. So the mind is not physical, fundamental point. If we can discover that Buddha is in fact mistaken in his own experiential findings, that the mind is not physical, if we can discover that he's mistaken, then the whole of Buddhism will collapse into a heap of incoherent nonsense. So we take that as our working hypothesis, because it's throughout the entirety of the Buddhist view. Mind is not physical. It's used synonymously with the word consciousness. Second, it is not, this is a crucial point too, it's not the handiwork of anyone else. So if you're a materialist, you believe your mother and daddy created you, they're the blame. And if you're a Christian or a Muslim or someone, you're the handiwork of God, a creator. No views like this. Buddha would not argue that your parents give you a body and they give you a brain, they give you the DNA, they give you the chemicals, no problem. But that for the Buddha is not the mind itself. Without insulting neuroscientists, I would say that what goes on in the brain and the body and all the other business is like the indicator of what's going on in your mind, which is not physical. Consciousness, mind. So one, is not physical. Two, it's not the handiwork of a creator or anyone else. And this is a massive point to get in touch with, to even take as your working hypothesis, because the instinct we have is that, we are the product of mummy and daddy, which we all look, don't we, for the problems. And then we go back to grandma, grandpa, back to the monkeys. That's the analysis we do, not for the Buddha. So mind also is not, mind has these subtle levels of cognition, as I said. This is crucial to understand, if you want to understand the Buddha's view. And mind also, okay, so if mind is not the handiwork of someone else, then our question is, well, where did it begin? We want something, we want a beginning. Well, it's a non-question for the Buddha. It says if everything is the product of cause and effect, if everything is the product of cause and effect, and he said that's very much the view the Buddha would say is how reality is, speaking simply, one level of reality, cause and effect, then this moment of my mind, if we take our own mind as the topic to discuss, this consciousness of mind, this capacity for cognition, this moment of my capacity for cognition, its main cause is the millisecond before. And the main cause of that is the millisecond before. And the main cause of that is the millisecond before. And the main cause of that is the millisecond before. And if you track back, and it's a good meditation to do, you would get back inexorably to the first moment of conception in your mummy's womb or your fallopian tube, wherever it is. So then you have to say, well, where's the second before that? The egg and the sperm, we know they were in mummy's and daddy's bodies, no problem. But the mind, it's got its own continuity of mental moments. It's its own continuity, this non-physical moments of cognition. The moment before that, and you track it back a few weeks before that, and it was in a previous body, and so on and so forth. So the fundamental point, and this is the Lama Zopa when he started teaching modern people, mostly from, America and Europe and Australia and so on, in the 70s. The point he started with is trying to get our heads around this idea of, as they refer to it, as the beginninglessness of mind. And in fact, matter as well. The universe itself. I mean, the Buddhists still use this old-fashioned that we used to have in our culture a few centuries ago, the idea of the 4 elements: earth, air, fire, water. A bit like the Chinese, a bit like the Ayurvedic system. That's still the system in the Tibetan Buddhist, the Buddhist view in general, the 4 elements. So matter and mind are the contents of the universe, basically. And they're necessarily beginningless. As Dalai Lama said in all his conversations with the scientists, Big Bang, no problem. Just not the first Big Bang, that's all, So there's very much, it's a big point in the Buddhist view. How consciousness and matter, in fact, necessarily are beginningless. I know the Christians have this big discussion about the first cause, capital F, capital C, and of course they call that God. Well, that's where a major discussion with the Hindus, because they have a similar concept, where Buddha diverged in his own direction. He went as far as he could go in that brilliant system, 3,000 years ago, up to him, and then he diverged, because there's no view in Buddhism of an external energy that's intrinsic and that has no cause and is unchanging, which is the concept of what God is. Nothing like that in Buddhism. Concept of omniscience, of wisdom, of compassion, perfection, that's called Buddha, but it's not coming from it's not coming from out there. And it doesn't have a function of a creator. Not like that. We don't need creating. We create our own stuff. So the idea of the mind is that every millisecond of what we think and do and say, is the process of this one of creating karma, as they call it. I don't even know what karma means. I think something like action, Sanskrit word. Starting with the mind, intention, and then the body and speech follow it through. So every millisecond of what we think and do and say, and this means all beings, every monkey, every dog, every ant, all the other non-physical beings we can't see. This is the law that runs the universe. This is the law within which we run, the law of cause and effect. Everything we think and do and say is what is the process that we go through, that they use the analogy of seeds. Buddha used the analogy of seeds. The seeds are planted in our mind that if you allow all the right conditions manifest, will ripen then as in 4 ways. 1, a type of rebirth. 2, our own tendencies. 3, our experiences at the hands of others. And 4, even the way the physical world impacts upon us. So clearly this needs looking into. It's all there in the Buddhist literature. And this is a law that runs the universe as far as Buddha is concerned. And no one made it up. No one made it up. No one runs it. It's a natural law. It's a crucial point for the Buddha. It's a natural law. We're so used to the concept of God's law. There's no equivalent. This is a natural law. I always quote this. In New Zealand one time, this fellow asked me, and I've never had the question before or since. He happened to be a scientist. And he said, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? It was a brilliant question. And that's absolutely the question you would ask if you take the view that religion is a creator. But that's what we assume. So he assumed that. And I said, would you ask Einstein who revealed the teachings about relativity to him. Of course, he laughed. Everyone laughed. Of course, we wouldn't ask that because we know that Einstein used his intelligent mind, used his noggin. He observed the world in front of him, not something in the sky. And he identified certain things and then he codified them as laws and he presents them. And then he says, here's my findings, over to you. We know he's not asking us to believe it. We know his work is all there. And if it's true, we can prove it. Buddha's exactly like that. It's always a surprise to us because we so assume it's beyond knowing, and it's a belief system. And I never use that word belief ever. As the Dalai Lama says, if we modern people decide we want to become Buddhist, then basically you're taking Buddha's methodology, how to get wisdom, how to become a Buddha, how to develop compassion, and you're ticking the boxes as you go. And at some point, if you discover that, you know, what Buddha says will happen doesn't, and you can prove it, then you must reject the Buddha. Of course you must. But we're so addicted to this view of religion, a spiritual philosophy being unprovable, can't be proved. It's from above. It's sort of out there, above, beyond. That's not the Buddhist view at all. We have to think about that, and the implications of it are quite powerful. So this is the Buddha's view: mind, not physical, not the handiwork of creator, not the handiwork of mummy and daddy, not a function of the physical, intimately connected to the physical, but not a function of it. And the law that runs the mind is this law of karma. This is Buddha's observation, his own experiential observation. So everything, therefore, that we experience that we would label suffering, and the first kind of suffering, which is when the bad things happen, everything we experience that we label suffering, Doug punching me in the nose, stubbing my toe, this is the fruit of seeds I've planted, speaking simply. And also, so there are four ways in which karma ripens. And all of this is part of what we do in the Four Noble Truths in order to get to the point of having compassion for everybody else, because they're all in the same system. They're all, you know, on the same boat. There are four ways in which our actions ripen in the future. So-called happy, so-called suffering. These words are so simple, but they're basically either things that happen that are nice or things that happen that aren't nice. Happiness and suffering, speaking simply. So one way that karma ripens, as I said, is a type of rebirth. One way then within that rebirth, the second way your karma ripens is your tendencies, your mental tendencies. Whether you're psychotic, loving, compassionate, good at football, whatever. They're habits that you've brought with you. You come programmed into this life from the first second of conception with your own tendencies. And this is the part that's shocking, because all of our psychology, all our neuroscientific views, of course, are based on the evidence, the seeming evidence, the evidence of the physical, that you get it from your parents. You do get your brain from your parents, no argument. But you don't get your mind from your parents. So we have to make that distinction. It's not a contradiction. That's why these marvelous discussions that Dalai Lama's been having these last 40 years with all the best brains in the West, you know, looking at all this stuff, finding a way to bring them together. They're not contradictions. And the third way your karma ripens, as I said, is at how you're seen and treated by others. We can see we're very social beings, isn't it? So how we're seen and treated by others, and that's typically how we think of suffering. Bad things happen. People are mean to us. You're poor. The bank says no to your loan request. You stub your toe. The weather's horrible, you know. And the fourth one is even called environmental karma. So understanding then that whatever I think and do and say produces all of these experiences in the future, and whether they're happy ones or suffering ones, and that I am the main cause of these. My actions in the past set me up to experience these moments of happiness, these moments of suffering. So the consequence, the implication of this concept is ownership. I know when I first heard the teachings from Lama Zopa, you know, about karma, I didn't really get the word in the beginning, but somehow that was the missing piece for me. It was huge for me. I love this idea that somehow we are our own creators. The Dalai Lama says karma is like self-creation. Because the instinct we have deep in our bones, and it's a philosophical position, it's dualistic for the Buddha, that someone out there, it's a bit like a conspiracy theory. It's always someone behind everything. No, Buddha says, don't look anywhere else except here. Of course, the outside world plays a role. Of course it does. Things are interdependent. But the main player is one's own mind. So if what I'm experiencing is the fruit of my past actions, and if I don't want suffering and do want happiness, then it follows logically, I better start putting myself together. That's the implication of karma. It's ownership, not guilt, not, oh, I'm a bad person, not it's not fair, none of that. It's not punishment, it's not reward, because there's no punisher and there's no rewarder in the Buddha's view. No such concept exists. This is a type of analysis we have to do because it's opposite. It's quite different from the views we tend to have of religious philosophy, which imply a creator. I mean, I'm not criticizing. You want to have faith in creator, go for it. Nothing wrong. I mean, you live a good life. It's just not the Buddha's view, that's all. So the first kind of suffering then is basically, the first kind of suffering is when the bad things happen. But let's look at the second noble truth to really help us understand that one. And the second noble truth is there are causes. So the two main causes, karma, delusions. For happiness, it's past karma and virtuous states of mind. So to understand this, we have to understand the Buddha's view of the mind. It's vital because it's fundamentally different in so many ways. You know, first, not being physical. Second, not being the handiwork of someone else. So when you learn, when you study Buddhist psychology, you learn the epistemological model, the way the mind works. And this alone, I tell you, is totally fascinating. Modern scientists would absolutely delight in this. But you've got to first posit the possibility that you're discussing not physical, the cognitive process, which is not physical. And then you've got the psychological model, which is the contents of the mind. This is our main concern here. So in the psychological model, the Buddhist view describes basically three categories of states of mind. Among all the thousands of thoughts and feelings and emotions, this seeming chaos that we have in here, our capacity for intellectual thoughts, our emotional ones. There's so much going on in this mind of ours. We can divide all of these into three categories. The first lot are called delusions, or if you like, neurotic states of mind, deluded states of mind, literally that are rooted in being misconceptions about things. There are the emotional ones like attachment and anger. Then you've got the other ones, the intellectual ones. The Buddha would suggest that the concept of a creator is a misconception. He's not being rude. That's his observation. And there are consequences. There are consequences to that. And this is where this is counteracting this view of the dualistic view of a creator leads to the Buddha's views about emptiness and dependent arising. So it's not just some kind of argument, you know, it's not just being sort of argumentative. It's got extreme, powerful experiential implications. So all the states of mind that are misconceptions, some of which are emotional, and they're the major ones to try and look at. Then you've got the positive states of mind, the valid states of mind, the reasonable states of mind, the conceptual stories that are in sync with reality. And there's a third category that I like to call the mechanics of our mind. So to understand these, you have to understand this concept of negative and positive, these first two, non-virtuous, positive, appropriate, useful, reasonable states of mind, such as love, compassion, intelligence, kindness, blah, blah. The neurotic lot, like attachment, anger, jealousy, depression, low self-esteem, as well as some of the misconceptions, philosophically speaking. Then the third category, neither negative nor positive, they have no character like that, but they're vital states of mind. So in this third category, I call them the mechanics of the mind. You've got like concentration, good memory, one called discrimination, the ability to discriminate second by second between this and that. These, I mean, monkeys have these. Mindfulness is a term that's used for this word called good memory, remembering something from moment to moment, not losing the memory. Short-term memory, you know. The monkey, as Lama Zopa says, thieves need mindfulness. So they're neither negative nor positive, but they're crucial states of mind. So we forget those here. The ones that are the source of our suffering directly are the emotional ones, the neurotic ones. So here, Buddha would say there are I'm going to talk about 84,000, you know, neurotic states of mind. And you can divide them all into three. They all subsume to this three. As we all know from Buddhist teachings, you got the three poisons. Very cute phrase, you know, so sweet. 3 poisons. Oh, I'm suffering from the 3 poisons. Go to the therapist. I've got the 3 poisons. They'll laugh at you and go home, you know. So what I mean, what is it? The root delusion, the root of them all, this primordial misconception deep in the bones of our being that assumes a concrete, solid, definite, pointable, findable me and everything else. This is the final one to go, the final cause of all suffering. Upon the basis of this, we then have attachment to get what that me wants, this primordial emotional hunger. This is there all the time. And then when that doesn't get what it wants, because it only wants the nice things, that's aversion. We have the panic attack of aversion. So that's got a whole kind of like spectrum. You know, you've got the violent anger, shouting and screaming and yelling. You have the mild aversions, which we don't even think about: annoyed, frustrated, irritated, upset. They're polite words for mild anger, the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. And then all the way to kind of, you know, the internal, they become internalized as depression and despair. You know. The 3 poisons. The words are so cute, but it's profound. If we can understand these, first theoretically and then experientially in our own practice, we really understand Buddha's view of the universe, you know, and why we suffer. So basically, speaking brutally, but it's technically correct, the suffering of suffering is when attachment doesn't get what it wants. This sounds so shocking to us, so brutal. But this is where we have to understand the depth and the depth of attachment, not just sort of, oh, I like chocolate cake. It's way more subtle than this. It's this intensely subtle, continuously there. It's at the level of assumption. And the assumption of this attachment is that I must get what I want. It sounds very brutal. It sounds painful. It sounds like not fair, like criticizing us. But we have to see it. This is the Buddha's view. This constant assumption that I must get what I want every millisecond. It's multifaceted. So, you know, attachment can be for any object, can be for sex, drugs, rock and roll, money, power, you name it. It can, but the more primordial level is attachment broadly to get what I want every second. And then a panic attack when I don't. Well, you could say when attachment doesn't get what it wants, that's what suffering is. It sounds very cruel. But literally, this is a way of giving the analysis, you know. So when you stub your toe, pain arises. An unhappy feeling, pain in the body, isn't it? Mentally and physically. Because attachment only wants happy feelings, you see. Attachment primordially only wants happy feelings. There's only really 3 kinds of feelings. The word Buddha, this is curious, it's in the 3rd category, the mechanics of the mind, as I call it. One is called feeling, and there's either a happy feeling, sensory or mental, unhappy feeling, or neutral. Forget the neutral. So all attachment wants, attachment default, all the time, yearning, craving, emotional hunger to get pleasant feelings, to get what I want, for things to be nice. Attachment can only handle nice things. So the second, the stub in the toe, the punch in the nose, not to mention the terrible things that do happen on this planet. One, they're the result of your past actions, all your happy experiences as well. And they are the result, therefore the past action, and then the result is this unhappy feeling arises. And the present situation, the immediate one, the past action ripens as an unpleasant feeling. A past negative action of harming this consciousness is now labeled Doug, could be 47 lives ago. Now, upon meeting the object called Doug, suddenly my past action, the seed, ripens as a punch in the nose. So the experience of unhappy feeling is the fruit of a non-virtuous action, quite literally. And then it manifests from the outside because of the karmic connection with that person. And karma is personal. And because it's a law, it can't be random. This is one of the biggest shocks for us. There's every millisecond of what I think and do and say throughout the day put seeds in the mind that will produce my future feelings, unhappy and unhappy or happy, plus the experiences from the outside. And everything I think and experience now is the fruit of an action I did. This is the fundamentals of karma. Whereas the instinct of ego, isn't it? The instinct of this I, the instinct of attachment is it's not fair, how dare, you know, I only deserve happiness, I don't deserve suffering. That's deep in our bones, that view. Buddha says it's a misconception. So taking this on board is huge. So even before we go further, understanding this for me, then instead of guilt, which is what we tend to do, have compassion for yourself. Then you look outside and you see someone punching and getting punched. You'll actually have even more compassion for the person punching. The person being punched has just finished their karma. The person punching is just beginning their karma. So this understanding of the Four Noble Truths is the absolute basis for having valid compassion. Compassion that's not just sentimental. Oh, the poor dog, look at getting kicked, you know. Because the compassion we have now is based upon the view it's not fair. Innocent victims. We only really are prepared to have compassion for innocent victims. And that usually means a few children and a few animals. It's about it, isn't it? Because we have this view in the mind. It's just there. We don't analyze it. But you've got to deserve my compassion. That means you have to be innocent. The Buddha says we're all in the same boat. Everybody wants happiness. Nobody wants suffering. Everybody's ignorant of cause and effect. And we're all continuously experiencing the fruits of our past actions, happy and suffering. So when we have the suffering ones, we think it's not fair. How dare you do that to me? I don't deserve it. When you have the happy ones, you don't care whether you deserve it, just greedily want more. So give me more, please. I'm joking, it's true though. I've never yet had the question from anybody ever on the planet, Robina, why do good things happen? We only ever think of karma in terms of bad. Because we assume we all deserve good, so we take that for granted. And we all assume we do not deserve bad. But this concept of deserve in Buddha's view of karma is a schizophrenic concept. It's completely absurd. If you've got weeds in your garden, of course you deserve them. You didn't pull them out. And if you've got flowers, you definitely deserve them. You must have planted them. So own them. Own responsibility for both. It's one of karma is the hardest one for us. It's really relating. It's really leading to emptiness. Very interesting. Cause and effect is one of the logical, the first levels of dependent arising to prove emptiness, you know. So, yeah, I'm trying to say a lot here in 1 hour. This is for oneself, but the point I'm getting at, this is like learning nutrition. Now when you see other people, you don't just have compassion, but you now know how to help them. This is the point of the wisdom wing. Got to put yourself together first. Understand what your suffering is. Know you want to be sick of suffering. Know you are sick of suffering, and know what the causes are, so you can stop causing it in the future. Can't stop today. If I can punch in the nose, I can't turn it back, but I can learn about it so I don't have it again. You stub your toe, so you learn to be more careful, so you don't have it again. It's reasonable. So the idea then, which getting at is this fundamental point about what the mind is in Buddhism, that it's a continuity of mental moments, not physical, doesn't come from someone else. Everything is in it is there because you put it in there. And this word you is very loosely used just to refer to whoever the person was at the time, whether you're a dog 27 lives ago or, you know, a boy last life, just the you of whoever it was, because this is the continuity of mind, an unbroken continuity of mental moments going back and forward. And the idea is, Buddha is saying, we can be free of suffering and its causes. We can be free of suffering and its causes. So this is the first level. So the first way to stop the suffering of being harmed by others, which is a simple example of the suffering of suffering, is to stop harming others. It's pretty evident. If you don't want future diabetes, you stop the causes, which means you stop eating the sugar, you know, whatever. You take responsibility. So if you don't want to be harmed by others, then you don't harm them. This is what's at the very basis of Buddha's practice at the very first level, entry level, junior school, grade 1. Don't harm others. And this is again a crucial point. Jesus says don't harm others as well. Jesus says don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. And I always quote this. And again, it's a crucial point to understand. Why? You should ask Jesus, why shouldn't I kill? And he will tell you, and this is my Jesuit priest friend quoting him, because God says. And I'm not criticizing that view, but it's just not Buddha, that's all. It's a natural law for the Buddha. You don't kill because guess what? People don't like getting killed. That's what defines something as a negative action in Buddhism, is an action that harms another. It's a natural law, nothing to do with Buddha. Just like, you know, eating sugar causes diabetes. It's not to do with your doctor. You're getting diabetes because you're a naughty girl and didn't do what the doctor says, so she gives you diabetes. We don't have that view. We know it's a natural law, and we thank our doctor for pointing out the terrible suffering that will come if we don't put ourselves together. Buddha's like that. So Jesus says negative action is doing what God said not to do. Why? Of course, it's reasonable. God's the creator. God's the boss. God runs the show. That's reasonable. That's not the Buddha's view. It's a hugely different point. It's not just being clever talking this way. It's not just being sectarian. It's a huge point. Philosophical, yes, but underpins all our practice. And it brings ownership, responsibility, because we are our own creator. That's the way Buddha's saying it. It's a huge point. So in order to stop the first kind of suffering, just forget the one about lower realms, okay? Just the one of being harmed by others. The third way our karma ripens is called experiences similar to the cause. We are all very social beings, aren't we? We start off by being born in another person's womb, for God's sake. Then we have mummies and daddies and siblings and aunties and uncles and rats and cockroaches. We are living in relation to others all our lives. And if you think about it, if you track back, you can divide all your experiences in relation to others into two categories. The ones that are horrible and the ones that are nice. That's it. Forget neutral. The people who are mean to you, lie to you, kill you, steal from you, harm you, badmouth you, don't like you, cheat you. I mean, we all know these experiences. And this is the major way we suffer, the pain of being harmed by others. And then we can divide the other ones, or the positive ones, people who like you, are kind to you, love you, compassionate to you, give you things, take care of you, like a miracle. But of course, we just think this is good luck and bad luck, don't we? We have no view about why these things happen. We have no concept like that. If we don't have a creative view, you just think it's pot luck, you know? No such thing as good luck and bad luck. It's superstition. You don't have weeds because it's bad luck. You have flowers because it's good luck. There's a law, a logic that proves that is the cause of these things. So every moment of those experiences of people being mean and harm, but there's a simple way of saying the suffering of the experiences similar to the cause. So logically, I don't like being punched in the nose by Doug. So if I'm taking this view seriously, then I will get out of his way, maybe. That's sensible. Don't just say, oh, yeah, it's karma, punch me again, Doug. Leave the wretched man if you have to, please. He's a maniac. Don't put up with it. That's reasonable. But learn from it. Learn from it. That's the fruit of my past action. That's a major learning. And then because I know I don't want it again, you stop causing it. It's really not complicated. We make it complicated because we make it so emotional and neurotic and punish and reward and blame and guilt. We muck it up, you know, we can't hear it clearly. And happiness is the same, but we never bother about that. But we should. I mean, if you analyze in a day, if you numbered in a day the number of moments when everything goes nicely, but we take them for granted. We take them for granted. The fact that we can walk down the street and no one attack us, the fact that the sun is shining on our body, the food is tasty, every single moment is the fruit of some past virtue. Because whenever you get what is nice, that's the fruit of virtue. Whatever you get is not nice, it's the fruit of non-virtue. It's a simple technical explanation, you know. Of course, it's all hypothesis in the beginning. It's not evident to us. It's not complicated. We make it complicated. So you delight in all the good things and think, I like that, I must do the same again. And you learn from the bad. This is the very first level of practice. So then the conclusion is you don't harm others. If you don't want to be lied to, don't lie. If you don't want to be not believed, don't lie. If you don't want to be stolen from, don't steal. If you don't want to be killed, don't kill. It almost seems too simplistic to us, you know, but it's all there in the body of knowledge. It's all there in the text, in the literature, this explanation. Of course, in the beginning, it's just theoretical for us. You take it as your working hypothesis. You've got to start somewhere. And then slowly through experience, you prove it to be true. And if you prove it to be untrue, we'll say, thank you, Buddha, goodbye. It's up to us, you know. So the point I'm getting at here is when I can know this for me already, my compassion is huge. It encompasses now all the people who are doing the harm. Whereas we do not have compassion for them now. No way. Our compassion now is based completely on innocence and victim and blame. So, you know, you have compassion for the dog. Next millisecond, you're angry with the guy who kicked him. That's the way we think of compassion now. But here, with this view alone of the first kind of suffering, you're going to have even more compassion for the guy who kicks, driven by his own past, driven by the karmic connection with that animal, driven by his own crazy mind, creating future suffering himself. Just the very first level of suffering is huge. This is how you get then this courageous compassion. So any questions about just that? Are we on Zoom? Where's the Zoom? Where are the people? I can't see them. Are we on Zoom? Oh, I need to see the people. I didn't bring my computer. I'm so sorry. Oh, I must see the people. Come on. But I mean, permanently. Get your computer, Miriam. I forgot all completely. I have to see them. So I'm talking to them as well as you, aren't I? That's right. I completely forgot. Okay. So any questions, people? On Zoom as well? Where? Yes. Go. Bit into the mic, darling. Into the mic, on would helpful. Be on. It's not just my deafness, I promise. Just press the button. Thank you, Mariana. Go on, darling.
So, yeah.
It's not on. No. Just speak loudly and we can all, and I'll repeat to the people on Zoom. Go on.
Speaking of death.
Death.
I was in a car accident that caused someone to die. And my intention was not for them to
That's
die.
right, exactly.
That is something I deal with a lot. And my thought, and I listen to the news and I hear, oh, another car accident, someone died.
Right.
Right. So that I my karma causing.
Right. So the question
is, well, I'm waiting for the reaction.
No. Okay, let's look at it. Okay. In order to understand that, we have to understand how we create karma, how it happens, the mechanics of it. Simply speaking. Okay, that's great. Relax. I can now answer. Okay. So, in order for any action we do to bring what they call a fully ripened result, which is a type of rebirth, but that's just only one. There's many kinds. There's the type of rebirth. There's a tendency to keep doing it, the experience of having it done to you, and then the environmental result. But anyway, in general, a complete action would have 4 things in place when you did it. So where are you? So let's just say killing. Just stay there. So let's just say killing, and let's just say, sit down, darling. Sit. I'm not going to see you there. So let's just say it was a complete action that you did. That would have meant, 1, there has to be a person there, because killing means you're going to kill somebody. There's got to be a living being. That's the driver. Hello, people. Happy to see you all. I'm sorry I ignored you before. Look at you all, your smiling faces. Betty, Anna, Mary. Look at you all. I'm so glad I forgot. You have to let the person have the computer. Look, they can see me now. Okay. So you have to have first a person there. That's the driver of the car. Second, the second part is your mind involved in the action. There's 2 bits, 2A and 2B. There has to be the intention, not motivation, but I will kill that person. It has to be in your mind. 2, a motivation for it, which usually would be negative. I hate him, anger, attachment, some motivation. So intention and motivation. Do you understand? That's the second component that has to be there. 3, you do the action. 4, result, dead driver. Roughly speaking, that's a complete action of killing. And that means that would sow seeds in your mind that will multiply and produce many suffering rebirths, plus an intention, plus an experience, plus all the other 4. Do you understand? But in your case, it's very evident you didn't have any intention, therefore there's no motivation to kill this person, but it still happened. But how can you say there's much imprint in your mind? Because if the mind is everything that determines everything, what goes on in the mind. So intention is the mind engaging in it. If there's no mind engaging in it and there's no motivation, how can there be an imprint in the mind? Just like if you're walking down the street and there's a homeless person one, the object, two, intention to give $20. There's no intention, you don't see them. And two, motivation. There's no motivation. Three, $20 falls out of your pocket. Four, they get $20. Zero karma. It's pretty much just like that. It's logical because the mind's not involved. Which means you don't go, oh, phew, I didn't really mean to, who cares? No, you have compassion because clearly there's a karmic connection with you and him, whatever, this person, you know, and due to their karma. I mean, my sister Julie was sitting in the middle of the road in the winter about to turn into her drive, and this motorcyclist ran into the back of her and he died. She said she had more grief from that than even the death of her own baby. She couldn't understand. It was an amazing experience. I mean, whatever, but it's very fascinating, isn't it? So there's no reason to have guilt and I'm bad and my God is terrible and there's going to be karmic results. That's just superstition. You just know there's some karma there between you and this person, some history, because the Buddha's view of karma is everything it's a natural law. So then whoever you meet, however you're seen, however you do, whatever they do, whatever is due to some past, you know, this poor precious person, due to some action of their own from who knows how many lifetimes ago, created the cause to be killed by you. You understand? So you know that you have compassion, and then you, even though you didn't intend, you wish never to do it again. So you purify your karma. You learn from it. No point in guilt and bad, you know, no point in that. You understand my point, darling? Does that make sense? Good. Yes, yes, yes. Please.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
So it seems that my karma has produced 6 children, which are now adults, one of whom has created some problems in the family, and it's come so bad that now he's almost homeless.
This poor boy, how sad, so heartbreaking.
Seen the progression.
I can believe you, darling. Yes.
And I tried to have compassion.
Of course you do. That's right, exactly.
Coming to the house.
Exactly, exactly. I understand.
So the compassion and the wisdom need to come together where I, as the matriarch of the family, which
That's
I
right.
certainly am,
That's right.
can deal with this.
Exactly, darling. This is a brilliant example. What's your name?
Meredith.
Meredith. This is such a good an example to show how, like you just said, wisdom and compassion have to come together now, right now, because, you know, so, okay, there's this, you know, there's this kid, your own son, right? You gave birth to him out of your little womb, didn't you? So that means he came running like a magnet. I mean, the thing about karma is a few weeks before, you know, his conception in your fallopian tube, he left another rebirth. One of his karmic seeds of non-killing was triggered that caused him to get a human mummy, but he clearly had very strong tendencies, attachment, delusions, as well. He's got good qualities, I hope. I presume he's got good qualities too, hasn't he?
He does.
That's right, exactly. But these are the tragic ones. The attachment to drugs and others cause so many other sufferings, don't they? So there he is. He came, so there's an intense karmic history with you two. He comes to your womb and with his siblings and with his daddy and everybody else around. And so then that means you got this history with him. Here's your responsibility. You did your best. And so you don't have all this guilt that you caused it. You don't feel that.
Not at all.
You can see that, can't you? He got his own. We can see he brought his own stuff. You can think it.
Restraining order to keep him from the house.
I know, just a sec. So, but you can see you didn't give him. This is where the Buddhist view is. You don't give him these neuroses, which is why it can be so much pain for parents if they think that they caused that child. You understand the guilt and the shame and the hopelessness that come. He brought his own stuff with him. So do the good ones. You understand? So this is the wisdom, isn't it? That, okay, this is where we have to, what causes us to lack the wisdom to know how to have wise compassion, if you like, courageous, is attachment. So clearly you're doing this well, but attachment, typical one of a mummy. I mean, the number of times I have someone coming and tell me the story, and they're saying they've got this person, the son lives in the house and he doesn't do the dishes, and he does. I'm assuming he's 10, but no, he's 47. You know, and I think, oh my God, this poor mother still looking like he's a 4-year-old. You know, it's unbelievable. So wisdom is, in this case, attachment would be what would blind you. Your emotional connection to him, your neediness for him to see you in a good light, your fear of him, all the rubbish that mothers have, you know, the negative side. And that would be just help perpetuate his suffering. So for you to have the courage to chuck him out, to do whatever, for as much as you can for the sake of everybody else, but also for his sake, you don't do it to harm him, do you? You do it in the hope that it'll be a wake-up call for him. But the thing, so that's marvelous. It's all you can do. But the thing is this, it's an important point, I think. You're doing what you can to help, aren't you? Him.
Absolutely.
Would you agree with that? But what happens is if we have attachment, we think, well, because I'm doing something to help him, he'd better bloody well be helped and behave nicely. And when he doesn't, we feel like we didn't do a good job. You can't do more because you are not the main cause of him putting himself together. He is. So as much as you try to help, don't have any expectations that he'll come to the party, which means you've got to be really tough for his sake as much as everybody else's, isn't it? Is that what you're really effectively saying, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And you feel clear. I mean, you seem pretty clear about it.
Thanks for your teachings and your podcasts.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
I'm so free from guilt.
I'm so happy, darling. Of course it is. I know. No, of course. So, yeah. So he doesn't respond to any kind of help from you. Doesn't try. He's so overwhelmed by his own misery. He can't do anything for himself. I know. It's very sad, isn't it? I know. It's true, isn't it? Well done, though. You're doing well. No, I understand, darling. Totally good. I agree. What else, people? Yeah, I mean, this is a really common one where attachment gets in the way. Like you say, you got a neurotic mum. People always talk about the neurotic mums, you know, who are possessive and dominating and needy and never satisfied. You can offer them your blood for breakfast. They'll still be wanting more because attachment is a bottomless pit that can never get enough, you know. And so this is the thing, the point I'm making with you, but let me say it again. There you are trying to make your mum happy, going to visit her, and you tell her you love her, you do what you can, she still moans, you complains. Then we all assume, well, I didn't do enough. No, you did. You can't do more. So to not have the expectation that because you're helping your mum that she should be happy. No, she's got to make herself happy. Your son has to put himself together, but you just be there as much as you can, you know, isn't it? And be content because it's a dependent arising, you and him together. You understand? Wow. What else, people? Yes.
We have a question online, and we have a request if you could repeat all the questions included.
Yeah, it's true. Exactly. Point. That's a good point. Thank you. Yes, exactly. Well, the first one was that, what's your name again? Who? Lisa killed somebody in a car accident, but she didn't mean to. And the second one, Meredith talks about her junkie son who's causing problems in the family and everything. There's only so much she can do. So you have restraining orders on him now.
I will be next week.
Really, darling?
After I came down here from Oregon.
I believe. Is there anywhere he can go or anything he can do? Nothing. He's got. That's the thing. You see, you can give him everything, but if he doesn't have the will himself,
He just shows up at the house and gives us grief.
in what sense gives you grief? What does he do?
Fine for a little while, then he starts arguing and blaming.
Okay, I get it.
For money from his trust fund.
Okay.
Help me out.
Oh, I understand him. My God. Oh my God. I understand.
Why did I have such?
I know. It's all right. That's okay.
Oh,
That's
never
right.
mind that question.
I know. I understand. I understand. Yes, go on.
From online audience, Kim said,
Yeah.
I am an introvert and like to be by myself most of the time. How do I practice compassion without meeting people?
I understand. No, it's a very good question. I mean, nothing wrong with it. It's a good question. It's a very good question. I mean, if you know, it's like you can be a yogi in the mountain for 10 years doing your practices, not even meeting a rat. In fact, you would consciously not want to meet human beings. The best way to do a retreat is to be in a place where no one sees you and you see no one. Now that sounds, for our world's view, that sounds like a completely autistic, schizophrenic, self-centered narcissist, doesn't it? No, it can be motivated by your wish to put yourself together so you can come down the mountains with some wisdom and then really help people. So then make your motivation that. Don't just, I don't see many people. Use that time to put yourself together so that you can have compassion for others, so that you can be of benefit, but cultivate compassion in your mind. These yogis, that's what they're doing in the mountains. They're developing unbelievable compassion for suffering sentient beings. And that's why they stay in the mountains, to get the wisdom to know how to help them. Then they come down. So treat it like your retreat. That's the way to make it. You can cultivate masses of compassion in your meditation. And then the proof of the pudding is that when you come out, you'll be able to activate it. It's not just being self-centered, it's excellent. Go on, next one. Yeah.
I'm wondering about the role of personal responsibility.
Talk on the mic, sweethearts. I'd love to hear you.
about the role of personal responsibility in structural, like racism.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yes. I understand, darling. I understand your question very, very well. Okay. Yeah. But I have to flip it over for a sec. I want to flip it over purposely so we can then look at the whole thing. We know that some people get born to really, Oh, the question. Yeah. What's your name? Nancy wants to know where our personal responsibility comes when we look at the structural sufferings of racism, sexism, injustice, poverty, and so on. Is that correct? Okay. I want to flip it over purposely and then look at the whole picture. Would you agree that some people get born to wonderful parents with a beautiful life, money in the bank, look beautiful, treated beautifully, get jobs? Would you agree with that? That is also the result of karma. Are you hearing me already? That is also the result of their virtue, their kindness, their goodness, their compassion, their humility, their patience. Every experience we have, whether it's suffering, labeled poverty, labeled racism, labeled sexism, or whether we have happiness, which is simply called having a lovely family. Every single experience, every tiny millimeter of every moment of what goes on in their mind, how they're seen by others, the environmental result is the fruit of their past actions. So the broader picture is always the one I want to try and get first. But our trouble is we only ever ask the question when it comes to the bad things. Are you hearing my point? Really and truly, are you hearing the point or not? And say you're not if you're not. You don't quite get what I'm saying.
I'm still stuck on this. Where's the personal responsibility?
I know, but so where's the personal responsibility for the good things as well, is what I'm saying. Yeah. But that it's hard for us to hear that. So in other words, I just want to say these points first. So let's just use a simple analogy of a garden. You know, don't you, knowing botany, that both weeds and herbs both have causes, and you have to learn the botany to know what causes the weeds, which is called suffering, and to know what causes the herbs, which is called happiness. A really simple analogy. And you know that both of them are the fruit of your past work. Would you agree with that? Would you agree the flowers are the fruit of you putting the flowers in, and the weeds are the fruit of you putting the wrong things in? Speaking simply, do you accept that principle? So then turn that into the flowers are happiness and the weeds are suffering. It's a natural law that refers to all of happiness and all of suffering. But we tend to only ask it in terms of the suffering. We never ask, why is there that person who has a beautiful family, who's treated beautifully, who gets everything they want, and has a lovely mind as well? We never ask, we just take the good for granted. But that's when the bad stuff happens, we have mental breakdowns. So that's a general point I want to make. So then when you say, okay, let's analyze more. So when you say personal responsibility, can you give an example of one person and explain exactly what you mean by that? Give an example of one person.
Well, I was thinking.
Turn it on, yeah.
Well, again, I'm thinking.
Go, darling.
Child who's born, whose parents are.
Okay, so there's one child who's born to lousy parents who beat them up, and you understand? Yeah. Okay, so now let's look at this example. Meredith. So this is this child who has good family. This child has good family, but look at his tendencies, look at his suffering. And if you saw him on the street, he'd be an example for you, wouldn't he? Now, are you with me here? But he happens to have a good mummy. So we tend to assume, first of all, if a person's got problems, it must be because their mother did something. Well, that's not also true. So this kid has got a good mother, good father, a kind family, but he brought his own tendencies from his own negativity, his own suffering. So he has these terrible experiences. That's why he's homeless. That's why he's a junkie. Are you with me here? That's one example. So you can have another example of a person who suffers from racism or anything. I mean, sexism, anything on the planet. It's the same example. But the trouble is when we hear it as blame. Oh, you mean they were a bad person in the past? Oh, you mean they deserve it? We hear it like that, don't we? Don't we? Would you agree with that? And that's because we have this dualistic view deep in the bones of our being that assumes we only deserve good things and assumes we don't deserve bad. But that's not rational. That assumption, we can't even see it in our mind. It's an assumption deep in our bones. In other words, we're shocked if we see bad things happen to people, aren't we? We're shocked by it, and we don't know why it's happening. And then when we hear the view of karma, the person created it themselves, we are even more shocked, aren't we? Are we communicating? So if you forget about a person who's suffering from racism, have you ever had anything bad happen to you in your life?
Yes.
And so then you, if you think of that experience, can you apply this view to that, or is it hard that you created the cause for it?
I don't think I created the cause.
You don't what, darling?
I don't think I created the cause.
You don't? No, that's right. Well, we all don't. I mean, it's up to whether you have the view of karma. So that's why it's up to us to think about it. If we want to take on the view of karma and apply it, but to all the experiences, it's a much bigger view than why do bad things happen. That's why I keep trying to answer it in the bigger picture point. But it's very hard for us to get past this one, because we have an assumption that people who suffer at the hands of others don't deserve it. And it's true. We all, in a sense, we don't deserve suffering. Of course, but I mean, even the word deserve, we could spend an hour talking about that. You know, for example, you look in your bank and you see there's no dollars there. You would never say, how dare there are no dollars in my bank? I deserve dollars. Please analyze my point. Why wouldn't you say that? This is the answer to the question. Why wouldn't you say that?
Because I didn't do anything.
Because it's your bank account. It's your bank account. So you take responsibility, don't you? So you take responsibility, don't you?
Yes.
But when we say I deserve, there's an assumption that someone else is supposed to put the money there. So when we have I don't deserve suffering, it's an assumption someone else did it to us. It's a completely dualistic view that Buddha would say is just not valid. But it's hard to unpack all this. Equally, if you see your garden, you don't say, who put weeds in my garden? I don't deserve weeds. And for the same reason, you wouldn't say that, because you know they're your weeds. You must have put them there. That's the analogies to use. But what it should, and this is the point where I'm getting at here, when we get this view for ourselves, what it brings is compassion for people, not blame. All I can do is say these words, and you just have to chew them over. It's a very different picture. It's a whole different analysis, isn't it? You know. Do you understand, sweetheart?
Very helpful. I have to think a lot.
Exactly, darling. Exactly. And that's up to us if we decide to take on board this view, you know. That's all. It's up to us. But what I'm saying is the experiential implications of it are ownership. So, I mean, if you even just forget about someone else having suffering, just look at our own suffering, the bad things that have happened to us, if we can take that on board, whether it's labeled, you know, being raped, or, I mean, in my case, I was raped when I was whatever age it was, or whatever it is. I'm just giving you examples. But seen in the light of this view, it's a very different approach to it. And it's still wrong. Doesn't, you see, saying that you created the cause to be raped, or saying that you must have created the cause to be poor, or saying you must have created the cause to have people be mean to you, it doesn't mean, oh, I forgot my thought now. It doesn't mean what? I forget. It's a long sentence. I'm sorry. Yeah, it doesn't. Oh, I forget the point. I've lost the plot now. Don't worry about it. Yeah, I mean, the deserve is a heavy word, isn't it? Deserve is so heavy. It's got such package behind it. Deserve, you know. Deserve. Oh God, that's how we have compassion now. You know, we're only going to have compassion for people who deserve my compassion, which means they've got to be nice people, and they've got to be innocent victims.
So your view of having been raped, for example, is bad things happen, good things happen. Well,
no, that's a bit flippant. No, I know, I understand, darling. I totally understand. I'm only using the example because it's just, one can take one's own experiences of suffering, you know. Well, actually, I shouldn't use that example. I don't want to get too, people get embarrassed when I talk about it. Actually, the people, yeah, anyway, I don't want to, I mean, now I've started, I have to finish. I mean, in the end, I was this hippie in hitching in Italy, and these two guys stopped. And then in the end, they were the ones who regretted what they did, because I was the one who became the boss. I tell men the details, and men feel sorry for these two guys, you know. So in the end, it wasn't sort of like technically, because I didn't have fear, and I got angry with them and told her whatever. So I didn't suffer in the end. So I can't, it's not a wrong example. Sorry. But anyway, any experience of when bad things happen, it doesn't mean it's easy. I handled that experience for whatever reason, so it was like almost like a party story. Doesn't matter the details, because I didn't have fear, so I handle it. But every time we've been harmed by others, it's usually completely debilitating because we feel hopeless, we feel like a victim, we feel like we have no power. So the fury and the guilt we have, I think, when bad things happen, and we go on and on and on about it, we feel upset. Then that's when you have to do the work. Like when your mummy's mean to you, or one of my sisters, one of my sisters, forget the rapists. One of my sisters just said, look at me, and I'd be bursting into tears, somehow. So when you understand, when you take the view of karma, you learn to own the experience. That's all, to own it. And therefore you don't suffer so much from it, is what I'm trying to say. So using extreme examples, I always quote the story of, it's a good way to analyze it, actually. The Dalai Lama years ago was invited by Richard Gere to New York to teach. And he decided, Richard Gere and the others decided they'd invite 20 former prisoners who'd done some kind of meditation in prison, right? And I remember people like me were invited because I was working with people in prison. And it was a wonderful day. They all met at Dalai Lama. They had a wonderful time. They all talked about their suffering, blah, blah, blah. And they also Richard Gere invited these 2 young Tibetan nuns to give a talk about their suffering. They'd been raped or sexually abused and tortured in prison in Tibet, right? So first of all, and this is why it's a good example of this whole thing we're discussing. So it's very evident when you heard these young women talking that this is the point now, they weren't angry. We need another hour for this one, but I'm trying to say it quickly. They weren't angry or despairing or pulling their hairs out or distressed. Why? Because the way we suffer, having a view that I didn't ask to get born, it's not my fault, life is just random, it's good luck and bad luck. So when a bad thing does happen, we freak out. Why is this happening to me? I don't deserve it. That's our first gut feeling, isn't it? That's the first immediate response. Because there's an assumption deep in our bones, this is what ego is, that I didn't ask to get born. It's not my fault. We feel that, we really believe that as a truth. So that informs the way we respond to when bad things happen. We freak out. But they weren't like that. And the answer is why, is because they have the view of karma. That's been around for like 4,000 years in India. And the Tibetans really, it's fundamental to their being. So in the same way that, neuroscience and the materialist view is in our bones, in our culture, that's in their bones. They're brought up with it since they're born. It's totally integrated into their life. Are you hearing what I'm saying? That this is the view of the world, that whatever you experience, happy or sad, is the fruit of your past actions. So it's not like they don't have this view of drama and guilt and deserve that we do, because it's counteracting what we have. So for them, they were quiet. They were telling the story. And then at the end, there was tears. And then one of them said, and this is my point now, and of course, we had compassion for the torturers because we know we had harmed them in the past. And they said, because we know that they will suffer in the future. This is what I'm getting at today, this topic. Karma is the basis of that view. Now, equally, you could be a Christian who believes God is in everybody, and you'll come to the same conclusion. So it's up to us what philosophy we do use. Do you see what I'm saying? If we want to have one. But the instinct of ego's philosophy is, it's not fair. How dare you do this to me? I don't deserve it. I didn't ask to get born. And we live in panic and fear because of it. Do you understand? I remember equally this conference we did in where are we? San Francisco. Oh yeah, we did a conference here years ago. Happiness and its causes in 2008. And one of the little topics was restorative justice. And when one of my friends Andre in North Carolina, who works with people in prison, he happens to be black, and a woman, a Christian who happens to be white, had this conversation. Their children had been murdered, and they were discussing their approaches to it. So this woman, she'd become a Christian as a result of her daughter being raped and murdered. She wanted to meet the murderer, to forgive him, all this business. And so she said she met this guy. He was so happy to meet her. He'd been on drugs at the time or whatever, and raped and murdered her daughter, who was 16. And he told her what happened at the end when he'd raped her, and he was convinced he had to then shoot her dead. And he said, before I shot her, she looked me in the eye and she said, I forgive you, and God does too. Now that's a different view, isn't it? But look at the consequence. So everything in the way, one point I'm making here is, we don't think that everything we think and do and say is driven by all these viewpoints in our head. But our mind is riddled with assumptions and viewpoints. And in a sense, all I'm doing here is we have to learn to question these and look at them. Do you see what I'm saying? And then find the way to think that informs our life in a healthy way and useful way, you know. To learn to find ways to find a way to forgive and have compassion, whatever. You understand what I'm saying? But it starts, the Buddhist one is it starts with dealing with yourself. And of course, this business of karma and the Four Noble Truths is fundamental in the Buddhist one. It's a starting point. Are we communicating, darling? Good, I'm happy. What else, people? Questions? Yeah. Yes, sweetheart. Talk to me. Come on, be brave. Talk to me. Sweetheart, sit down, relax. Come on. Talk to me. Bit louder, precious girl. I want to hear you. Closer to the mic, darling girl. Yeah, that's it. Go on. Talk to me. No, darling, that's what I said about her. She killed somebody, but she didn't mean to. So, sweetheart, it's got to be, it's obvious. It's obvious that what your mind does, the more strong it is in your mind, the more likely it is you program your mind like that. Karma is like programming your mind. So if you, by accident, do something, you didn't mean to do it. It's different. Okay, you've got to be careful. You can't just say, oh, I didn't mean to kill you, Robina. I'm sorry. You've got to be careful. But the more strongly your mind is involved in it, that's the way karma is. It's like programming your mind. The more strongly you do something with your mind, the more strongly that goes into your mind. It's like learning something. So clearly, if it's just accidental, it's not the same, darling. It's okay. Don't you worry. That's a pleasure. What else, people? 2 o'clock. We've got, no, 1 o'clock. We've got 30 minutes to go. Come on. Yes. All right, darling. Oh, I'm so happy. Thank you. I'll take it.
I'm wondering if you can explain this movie, the dualistic point of view a little bit more clearly, because I've read 200 of these books. I am absolutely on board with everything, and yet I still don't feel
Don't feel what? About
a dualistic point of view.
Oh, I see. Okay. There's different ways they use the term dualistic, you know. But one approach, one way is really related to karma. And that's exactly what, repeat the, yeah, what does she mean, what we mean by dualistic? There's different ways of using this concept. I've just been throwing it about a bit. But one level of it, the subtlest level of dualism is that you conquer, is when you finally become enlightened being, when everything, there's no longer any mistakes in the mind and you're complete, everything is integrated. There's no distinction between you and other, you know, I mean, like that. But this level, I would say this idea, this dualistic view is this strong view. I'm just saying here, there's me here. This is very much one. There's me here, and I'm an innocent victim. I didn't ask to get born. It's not my fault. I mean, I don't know who did it to me. And then we think everything is done to us, isn't it? We have a feeling of being this little lump of me plonked on this planet by some other person who has a plan. No one tells me their plan, and then bad things happen and good things happen. So I mean, no wonder we live in fear. In other words, this dualism here is very clearly that there's no relationship between me and the outside world. The Buddha's view is absolutely the opposite. As Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, first of all, when it comes to karma, everything that we experience, the way he puts it, is our own karmic appearance. So if you're really using the view of karma, just you walk down the street and have a stinky smell of someone's toilet, you'd say, ooh, yuck. Well, that's a moment of suffering, right? Would you agree? It's what attachment doesn't want. That's the fruit of a negative action. If someone comes along and murders you, the same. If someone comes along and gives you a bunch of flowers, if you see a rainbow, if you see the pretty sky, there's not meant to be kind of trippy. Everything that we experience, including the environment, people, things, is not just some accidental event, but we really do feel that the life is out there and I'm just plodding through it. That's very strongly if you like, dualistic in the sense that it's got nothing to do with me. It's got everything to do with you. That's a simple example. I mean, it's used very loosely, but there's more subtle, more precise ways of using the term as well. But that's a very clear one. And that comes to the essential point. I mean, as Lama Zopa says, and this sounds a bit shocking initially, that the vast majority of people on the planet have, his exact words, have absolutely no idea that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all in their lives. Meaning that everything, so this is the one about concrete view, this is about emptiness. There's a chocolate cake, right? And if you've got attachment to chocolate cake, that chocolate cake will appear to you as extremely delicious, won't it? But when you think that your mind doesn't play a role, the cake is out there from its own side, vibrating deliciousness at you, and you're just this innocent victim. What choice do I have but eat it? It's not my fault, it's the cake's fault. That's how we live our lives. That's dualism, definitely. But if you have the view that your mind, what's in your mind, informs the way the cake appears to you. This is the fundamental point in Buddhism. And this leads to the subtler one of emptiness. Do you see? And your life can be transformed if you really take on, because everything, instead of the victim, not fair, or bored, or this boring life, you want exciting things all the time, everything that's out there is like a rich, delicious experience because you're learning about your mind from it. Do you see what I'm saying? Excuse me, what else, people? Oh, where are we? Oh, yes, go. Hello.
I got this thing and I'm trying to boil it into a question.
Yes, yes, please.
So 35 years in government, in the public sector.
45 years in the public sector? Or
42.
who? 35 years in the public sector, you said?
Yeah, I work for city governments.
Okay, good. Good. Lucky city governments.
And mostly to help people.
Mostly.
Some ego drive. there.
Okay, of course, come on, it's human. Human nature, darling.
Right. So everything you say, I'm conflicting things with it.
Okay.
I spent all those years trying to help people. It's hard for me, maybe, as motivated by what I thought was altruism.
Sure.
From a career standpoint.
Yep.
Then to hear, and then we see everything that's taken place in the last 4 or 5 years, from George Floyd to all the injustice and the awakening of what's been going on. It's burden, anger we've had in society that has been irresponsible. So it's hard for me to, in a way, beginning to get it from a Buddhist standpoint. But it's still hard for me to hear that their karma, all this structural, structural problems that we have in society.
Yes.
Systemic racism. all
Yes,
this,
exactly.
that somehow they're responsible for it.
So it's just, I think you should stop at that point. They're the words, responsible for it. So then so say the Buddhist words back to me that you know as a theory to explain it. Just give me the words back as you understand it. And what does that mean, do you think? Put it in ordinary words. So put it in more words, what does it mean actually? So try and imagine, okay, so give the name to a particular one person's experience. Give the name of a particular one person experience. Just an experience of not being treated nicely. What's the experience that person's got? Would it be race? You want to use a racist example?
Yes.
Or you want to use a poor person example? Or you want to use...
Kind of one of the same. Kind of
okay, so in other words...
A poor child.
Okay, so good.
Birmingham, Alabama.
Yep.
Doesn't have a chance.
Yeah, exactly. Everything, exactly. Okay, so then let's just take our Tibetan Buddhist nun. Sit down, relax. At the teaching, right? I mean, the one who gave the talk in New York. You heard her say her experience. She'd been sexually abused and tortured. Okay, that's an intense personal experience, isn't it? Would you agree? And then you heard what she said. So can you put these two together or not? So it's just to say that we've got to start. I mean, her question and yours is both systemic. It's true. I mean, you know, the Tibetan situation, when the Chinese communists came along in 1950 and ran over their country and destroyed, and is still continuing to destroy their country, destroy the monasteries, run over. I mean, that's pretty systemic, if you want to use that word, for 50, 60, 70 years, okay? But if you break it down to individual beings having an experience. So there's one Tibetan nun explaining that she'd been tortured and sexually abused by these particular Chinese guards. And that was her response, because she has the view of karma. So what we have to ask is, what is it in our mind that bumps into it? What is the assumption in our mind that prevents us from hearing those words? What does it cause us to think? What are the consequences for you to speak it out? What if you have that view? for that child in Alabama who doesn't have a choice, as you just said, that Tibetan nun didn't have a choice in that moment, in that prison. So if you hear her view and you can see the way she responded to it, then what you see, your job isn't to go to that child and give a lecture. That's the first thing we hear. Because of course, as social workers and political activists, we are trying to help the world. There's no, I mean, and you look at the Dalai Lama, he doesn't go on about karma. He never uses the word karma in the West. He talks about political action, how to help others. So there's two things going on. One is, why is there poverty in the first place? And then there's, what can I do about it? So you're trying to do the do about it, isn't it? But we also want to know the why, isn't it? So if you can have the social worker aspect, you can have the political one, they're all good analyses. But if you want this fundamental one, the Buddhist one, it says because they must have created the cause. But so what is the problem? You have to analyze it, speak it out. What's the consequence of that that's shocking to you? That's right, exactly. Okay, now let's look at that word. This is the point now. This is a perfect statement. So perfect. So those young women in New York have the view of their world. Their world is integrated. Their life is integrated. Utterly, the view of karma is completely integrated into their being. It's just taken as a given, in the same way that the views that you have, that you probably haven't even articulated, are taken as a given. So your view is telling me that you don't have the view of a creator, otherwise you wouldn't be talking this way, because you know God has a plan. If you're totally Christian or totally Muslim, you would not talk that way, because you know God has a plan. But you're not saying that. So you have the materialist philosophical view. I'm not complaining. I'm trying to analyze, which says that your mother and father make you, which says we've all got human right to be treated properly, which then says you're innocent and you didn't ask to get born and how dare it happen to me, so they don't deserve it. I agree, that's a good philosophy, but look what it brings: confusion and fear and panic. And anyway, the Buddha would argue with it and say it's not valid, because they did create the cause. And that's why we get mad at people who are rich. That's why I'm guilty. I mean, I'm reading the New Yorker recently, an article with one of the big the oil family in Texas called the Hunt family. They own half the one on the planet. So this woman who's part of that family, and the grief and the pain and the guilt and the shame about being rich, it's the same problem. Because you have a view that you got born by your parents, you didn't ask to get born, it's not your fault, it's all just random and potluck. That's the view that you've got in your mind. So you need to look into that view. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm not forcing you to have the Buddhist view or the Christian one or anything you like. But on the other hand, it's very interesting. One of my sisters, Julie, and they always say I shouldn't talk about them on the television, but never mind, I do, and I can't help it. She is very fascinating. She is one of these people. She's always optimistic, always positive. She helps the poor, she helps the rich. She goes to the kids' school and teaches the poor ones. She's a graphic designer. She does the graphic design for the grandmas, for refugees. She's out there demonstrating. She never, ever, ever has any of those thoughts that you're talking. She's never asked once in her 76 years, why do bad things happen? She just gets on with it and helps. So everyone's different. She never agonizes of why the universe, why God, this, Buddha, that, karma, that. She just doesn't have those thoughts. She sees suffering and she gets in and she helps. She's a lot happier because of it, I tell you. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a view. But we've got to look at the deserve one. It's a heavy duty view. Deserve is sort of, and then it flips over into our compassion, because you're only prepared to have compassion if you met a person who had been mega rich and then stole from everybody and then got poor. You'd not have compassion for him. He deserves it. Do you understand? We're so heavy, you know. And it doesn't mean you don't stop working politically. Go for it. Change the world. Tibetans out there demonstrating like crazy. There's no contradiction. But what we also do here, when we hear karma, we're fatalistic. Oh, well, they deserve it. Then hit me again, Doug. I deserve it. It's because it's demented. Like it's saying, oh, I look at the weeds in my garden. I must have planted the weeds. I'm just going to sit there and watch the weeds grow. I'm such a bad person. It's so absurd. You learn from it immediately and pull the mothers out or leave the man. But we go, oh, I'm a bad person. I deserve it. Oh, are we communicating a little bit? Just have compassion, because I mean, have compassion, but have compassion for the, have compassion for their wacky parents who harm them, or have compassion for everybody. But compassion, our trouble with compassion is it's sentimental and gooey, but compassion is informed by wisdom. So, those nuns had compassion for the torturers. But it doesn't mean they go pat them on the head. We think compassion means you pat them on the head. Oh, poor thing, can't help it. No, put him in prison if he has to be, out of compassion. Call the police on your boy to stop him from harming. Very interesting, isn't it? And my sister Julie's amazing. She's never once had a thought the meaning of life in this sense. The meaning of life, God, karma, couldn't care less. It's boring to her. You understand? But she's amazing, kind, happy, helps people. Okay, she's got delusions as well, like everybody. Do you understand? What else, people? Come on.
Just to add to that, I heard a phrase recently that helped me that said, those who don't do complain, and the doers don't complain.
That's true. Helping, I mean, get out. I remember Martin Luther King, I remember he said, it's good to find fault, meaning what we mean by anger. There's injustice, there's racism. But then you say, what can I do to help? Get on with it. You know, that's compassion. Just get on with it and help it.
I'd also say there's an ego component with me writing to say, I can change this. I, as an individual, take on all of the systematic.
I understand.
I have anger as a minority.
No, I understand. I know. I understand.
But thank you.
But I also know myself just observing. I know I went through my own political activity. I was a very radical political activist, 20s and up to when I was about 30. And I remember, what I'm saying. Never mind. Don't worry about it. Forget it. Another question. Yeah. Another question. What, sweetheart? Yeah. Talk to me.
So, Mary Ellen was just reminding me that karma is not just this life. It's also things that happen, previous and continue that we have no awareness of. And so for me, I find that realizing karma affects things gives me agency.
So I start the last bit again, what?
That realizing that my past karma affects me now gives me agency because I can purify my karma. I can do good action to prevent those negative things.
That's the whole point. See, the real point about karma is not just this life. It has no meaning with just this life. I mean, if you look in your garden right now, by definition, what's there is the fruit of the past, by definition. And the past we're talking here is past that you came into this life programmed with everything that's going to ripen for you in this life. It implies past lives. It's not meaningful without that. Do you understand? Of course it means that. Exactly. That's the long-term view, which is the hardest one for us to hypothesize it because it just seems so abstract, Yeah, go. Come, yeah, please. Go, sweetheart. Oh gosh, I'm exposing myself here. So.
It's interesting that
What?
we're empty of
What?
a separate self.
Empty of a separate self. Let's get into difficult territories. Go on.
And yet there's an imprint upon our
Okay, I understand.
consciousness that
No, okay.
that's not separate, but what is.
No, I understand. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Okay. All of these teachings, so that you said, all of these teachings, all of these views that we're discussing right here are the first stages of practice related to the concept of cause and effect. That everything we think and do and say doesn't just disappear into the sky. Everything we think and do and say is sowing seeds, and seeds by definition produce fruits. So it's already quite dynamic, and it brings responsibility, accountability, ownership is what I'm saying. So, okay. And already that's leading us to the view of dependent arising and emptiness, because cause and effect, that whatever you do produces results. What we tend to think is, oh, I can do what I like. I can say what I like. I can think what I like. What that implies is it doesn't have consequences. Meaning, I don't mean consequences in a heavy sense. It's like saying, I can put any seeds I like in my garden. Well, yes, you can, but every damn one will bring a fruit, and you had better be very clear about what fruit you're going to get, because that you choose the seed you plant by the fruits you're going to get. But we don't think that what we think and do and say brings fruits. That's why we think if no one sees me do it, oh, I got away with it. That's schizophrenic. And that's the opposite to dependent arising. That's the opposite. It's just demented to think that that's possible. It's like thinking because your doctor doesn't see you eat sugar, you won't get diabetes. It's completely demented. It's a wrong, Buddha says that's a view of of grasping, of completely intrinsic existence, that everything doesn't have an effect. So cause and effect is the first logic to prove that everything exists interdependently. Everything is a dependent arising. And what that proves is that therefore there is no independent thing, independent action. So thinking that there can be an action I will do of eating sugar because my doctor doesn't see it won't cause diabetes is the assumption that there's no result, which is schizophrenic, is meaningless. That's the view opposite to dependent arising and emptiness. So when you start to go to the subtler level of these wisdom teachings that lead us to the dependent arising and emptiness, there's what calls the two truths. There's conventional truth, the way things exist conventionally, and each one of those conventional things has this ultimate characteristic. There's a final way in which it exists. So the shorthand for the final ultimate is everything lacks intrinsic existence, lacks independent existence. And then the conventional one is that there's dependent arising. Everything exists in dependence upon causes, conditions, etc., etc. So right now, Buddha says, we have the two wrong views. So when we hear that things lack an intrinsic existence, the shorthand is emptiness, we chuck the baby out with the bathwater. We become nihilistic. Oh, well, there's no I, there's no good, there's no bad, there's no this, there's no that. We fall into the abyss of the great mistake, as Tsongkhapa says. And then we have the other extreme view, which is the eternalistic view, fixed in space, absolute, this and that. They're both extreme views. They're both neurotic, unrealistic, not viable views. Things aren't like that. So then, in order to understand how everything that does exist lacks this intrinsic existence, and therefore everything that does exist has a dependent nature, there's no contradiction, but initially we hear it as absolutely contradictory. We go from like drunken sailors between two extremes. 1 minute there's nothing, fall into the abyss of the great mistake. Then there's something. So we over-exaggerate the somethingness and we under-exaggerate the nothing. We over-exaggerate the nothingness. So the bringing together of these two views, that's the final dualistic view, where these two appear simultaneously. So the way to practice that in daily life, do the analysis. If Buddha's saying we've got everything wrong, the delusions in our mind, the one we're discussing here, the root delusion, the ego, known as colloquially ego grasping, the view that clings to the I as well as everything else, as having this intrinsic, absolute, concrete, separate nature, set in stone, unaffected by anything else, not dependent arising. This is the source of all our pain. It's a view in the mind, deep in the bones of our being. No one put it there. No one taught it. It's just ancient assumption. That's the root problem. So if we get everything, if everything is appearing to us as having an intrinsic nature, whether it's the chocolate cake or the eye, or Doug punching me in the nose, then we have to first establish conventionally how things do exist, at least conventionally. Then we use the logic there to then prove how there's no intrinsic nature there. It's a conclusion we come to. So the I is always the good example, because the main player in our head is definitely I. The main voice, the main noun, I, me. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Everything does have a conventional existence. So there is an I that does exist interdependently, that does exist in dependence upon causes, conditions, parts, and finally the mind calling it that. And that thinking, that analysis of dependent arising leads inexorably to the conclusion, aha, therefore it is empty of intrinsic existence. So everything is like that. Every action, every object, every action lacks this intrinsic nature, but does exist conventionally. So there is an I, there is good, there is bad, there is up, there is down, there is this, there is that, but not in the way we think. We over-exaggerate the existence of things. We, as Lama Zopa says, these delusions decorate on top of what does exist, layers upon layers upon layers of characteristics that just don't exist there. So the job really is to strip away the layers, not chuck the baby out with the bathwater. To strip away the layers of the misconceptions that decorate the chocolate cake. The chocolate cake is a good example. So, you know, attachment, the branch delusions, attachment and aversion, for example, exaggerate, the attachment exaggerates the deliciousness of the cake. But it is coming from the root delusion, known colloquially as ego grasping or ignorance, this primordial conception of an intrinsic delicious chocolate cake. So attachment exaggerates the deliciousness, but the ignorance, the root delusion ignorance, exaggerates the very ontological status of delicious cake and makes it appear as if it's out there from its own side, having nothing to do with anything in particular, nothing to do with my mind. That's the final dualism to be gone. So it's the clarity and precision analysis that we know we need to do anything we call science is exactly what we need to employ to do this job of unpacking and unraveling the chaos in this mind of ours, to get to to strip away the misconceptions in order to see clearly how things exist. And that's what Buddha means by liberation. Then you add compassion to that, and you've got the two wings of the bird. So as Lama Zopa says, when you've realized the emptiness of the I, the lack of intrinsic nature of I, you know, meaning that from the side of the I, there is nothing there that makes it the I. It's as if, when we think that, it's as if there's no I. Ha ha, but there is, dependent arising, there is an I. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it doesn't exist. So these two seeming contradictions come together, you know. We've got to squeeze your brain, as Lama Yeshe puts it. And it's not just some airy, fairy, gooey feeling. Got to use much logic and analysis, because these misconceptions, the Buddha says, are deep in the bones of our being, and they're totally primordially existing, totally programmed. So we've got to unpack and unravel them, which is not an easy job, you know. And that's the job to be done. Time to go home, isn't it? Look, early time. Good, yes, please, come on.
One more question from online audience.
Uh-huh. Go.
And she said that you mentioned at the beginning that mind is not physical, and she wants to know the relationship between mind and brain.
Absolutely, yeah, good, thank you. I mean, I'm not a neuroscientist, so I don't know all the brain, but put it simply, not without trying to insult neuroscientists, I would say that what goes on in the brain is a physical indicator of what's going on in the mind, because they're intimately linked. So, you know, for me, a really good example, another one of my sisters, Judy, Judy, they all can't stand religion or anything, you know. We're all brought up Catholics, they all chucked it out. And Judy's great, she's, anyway, Judy's good. Judy's all right, Judy and Julie, they won't listen, I'm sure, but you never know. But Judy can't bear that, you know, all the Buddhist ideas and everything, but whatever, doesn't matter, that's not the point. But she loves neuroscience. She's a chiropractor, she's a lawyer now, trying to, anyway, whatever. Anyway, the point is, she's, neuroscience talks about, what is it? Developing new neural pathways in the brain. Are they the right words? Well, excuse me, folks, please listen. What causes that? Guess what? Thoughts. Thoughts. You don't get in there with a scalpel. You just change your thinking. That's what Buddha's been telling us for 2,500 years. Are we communicating here? So, but it excites her that the brain can be seen to change. But what made it change? She's saying, you know, I can't change this thing, so I've got to change my mind. But I'm developing new neural pathways. I'm so happy for her. I don't care about my brain. I know nothing about my brain. I know the left side and the right side. And if it leaves neural pathways, I'm happy. But my main concern is my thoughts. That's the mind for the Buddha. It's your thoughts. The cognitive, the subjective cognitive process itself. Are we communicating here? It's just a way of analyzing, that's all. I mean, that for me shows that the thought process, the cognitive subjective thought process is what makes the brain change. So what's the boss? Not the brain, the thoughts. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm not trying to prove the neuroscientist is wrong. I'm just trying to make a way of saying it. But also Buddha's a cognitive behavioral therapist. He's your best cognitive behavioral therapist. They're the people who say by changing your thoughts, you change your behavior, you change your life. Duh. Are we communicating?
Yes.
So it's whatever view you like, you know. So I think put Buddhism in 21st century language, it sounds exciting.
Venerable, we need to stop now because we're not the first stop on your teaching for today. So.
Oh, I'm 22, we've got 8 minutes.
Okay. Maybe offer my normal.
No, not yet. We've got more questions. Come on.
Okay.
Any more questions, are there? Or not? We don't have to have questions.
Yes.
Where are they? Go, sweetheart. Yes, please. Give the man the mic.
So I have been practicing, I have been doing spiritual practices for quite some time.
I'm very happy for you.
But I'm not seeing results.
You're not seeing results.
In the sense I'm not growing in compassion or wisdom or being able to deal with my difficulties.
Well, I think you need to stop right there. I'm a bit shocked. I don't think it's right what you're saying. How long have you been doing all this spiritual practice?
I've been doing different ones, but probably 15 years.
And you really sincerely, from the depths of your heart, believe you are seeing no change. I just don't accept that. And if it's no change, I wonder why you're bashing your head against a brick wall, because clearly your methods must be wrong. I think your problem, like the rest of us, is this is attachment. Attachment is a bottomless pit of dissatisfaction. And that no matter what we do achieve and how much we do, we're never satisfied. So I think that's your problem, with respect. Like all of us, we're never satisfied. You always keep thinking you should be achieving more. You'll exhaust yourself thinking that way. This is a major, major problem we all have. Are we communicating or not? Do you think?
I didn't have any special experiences or anything.
Excuse me, what do you mean by experiences?
Anything ordinary.
Excuse me, I have been doing this path for more than you, and I have not had one single millimeter of anything extraordinary, and I am glad, because it's a gradual, step-by-step plodding along, sowing your seeds and knowing the fruits will come. So it's attachment. That's all. The problem is your attachment thinks you should be doing more, thinks you should be experiencing more. That's your mistake, sweetheart, and I really mean it. So give yourself a break. So if you're really not doing a spiritual practice and you're lying to yourself, then okay, you better fix yourself. But it's a mistake. We all assume special experience. I mean, the number of people who have special experiences and they'll go mad. That's not spiritual. Spiritual means you're working away, planting seeds. Seeds take time to ripen. You really need to be a bit more humble with yourself and rejoice in your daily practice and just be content. I don't know. Are we communicating or not, please? What do you think?
But how do I know I'm making some progress? Because I understand special experiences, you don't look for them. But in terms of growing in wisdom or compassion.
You mean you're really not becoming slightly more patient, slightly more kind after all these 15 years? You really, 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 there you go, right there. You just said it. But what?
A lot of years.
What?
It's so many years of sitting and.
What do you mean by sitting? What do you do? Now we're talking about it. Maybe you got the wrong methods. What do you do?
I mean, I sit in Zen, like last 7 years or so, I've been sitting in Zen. Like
What do you do?
Just sitting style, like sitting and letting go of thoughts. I don't use.
Okay, so any other practices you do at all?
No, I didn't.
You don't take refuge. You don't think about the Buddha. You don't take vows. You don't do purification. You don't say mantras. Sometimes the Tibetan Buddhists would say all these practices relating to the Buddhas are quite potent, can help the mind shift. Maybe you should add a bit of that stuff to your practice. What do you think?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I'm doing the Zen tradition.
But did you hear what I said though?
Yes, yeah.
Because maybe just looking at your mind, not sure, it's not so powerful. But I still don't believe something isn't, that you're not making some progress. But can you not think of the, you see, this is where we have a problem with the karmic one. You won't hear that much in the Zen places, I understand. But if you know, I mean, I have to use ordinary analogies, I'm sorry, but if you have a garden, you know, I mean, what you're telling me is I've been planting seeds in my garden, Robina, but I'm so depressed because nothing seems to be growing. Well, things just take time to grow. So you've got to check if the seeds you're planting, if you are planting seeds, then they will grow, but you've got to be patient. What's wrong with that view?
Yeah, I mean, that's the view I resorted to now. Like,
But the main one is you're dissatisfied with your progress. That's your, do you understand how that's attachment or not? Attachment, main energy is dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction, not satisfied. I always should be doing more. All the time we're telling ourselves automatically it's not enough. This is our main disease. So I really ask you to look at that. And instead, be delighted that you do some practice and rejoice in your hard work and rejoice in your discipline. That alone, positive thoughts can help your mind lift. Are we communicating? Good, darling. Time to go home then, is it? Okay. Well, people, I don't know, this is trying to help you see how we have to have wisdom to get compassion. So this is the Buddhist approach. You want to have the Christian one like that lady, then fine, nothing wrong. But I'm just giving you the Buddhist approach, okay? Of how to have compassion for everybody. We're all in the same boat. Okay, people. So just keep working and please rejoice. You've got, what's your name? Who? Maish. You've got to rejoice, Maish. That's one thing we never do it. We always think the negative thoughts. I've never yet met a person who says, Robina, I can't stop thinking good thoughts. Maybe my sister Julie, she's like that. So have a few good thoughts about yourself. Be a bit more satisfied. It'll give you courage. I really mean it. It's a surprise to us, but I really mean it. And maybe add a few things to it. The Tibetans would say that adding anything to do with the Buddha can be very nourishing. Because we have to open our little hearts. We need a bit of devotion, you know. You understand? It can nourish your heart. Try. Okay, people, that's enough. So we think, we just do, yeah, we just think the words of the, so we'll just do the prayers. Okay, can I have a piece of paper? Thank you so much. I'll lead them. What, darling? Which one? Which one? Doesn't matter. The dedication. So I'll just say them in English, and then we'll say the prayer of Lama Zopa. Okay, but just say the words. We'll just say the words. Have this thought. Okay, this is dedication. That here we have been, a couple of hours, and the Buddhist view is nothing has gone astray. Everything gets stored in our memory. Nothing gets lost. And then also sow seeds. We just programmed our mind. So be so happy with that alone, just with that. These seeds we've planted, we think maybe nourish them from this moment forward without practice, without effort. So they will ripen in the future, no matter how long it takes, in the development of our amazing potential for our sake and the sake of others. Think that. And then think, may compassion grow and grow in the hearts of all. And then we can just say this Dalai Lama's few words of prayer, aspiration that Lama Zopa said, come quickly again to us. So peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, different levels of practitioners, victorious Losang, Tsongkhapa, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer, this aspiration, here and now, holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teaching through explanation and practice. You wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. Whereas while striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway, you should be reading with me, am I going so fast, which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings you suddenly departed to peace. Such a great loss. I think the word there should be such a great loss. That's just my personal view. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean, of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhichitta, of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And we leave that last one. That's okay. We don't do. Okay. So thank you, everybody. I'm happy to see you all. I'll see you again in 3 years or 10 or I don't know. We'll see. Next what? Next life. I'll say next life too. Next year. Oh, all right. Okay. Goodbye, people, Zoomers. Thank you, baby. Goodbye, darlings. Thank you so much, Mary, John, everybody. Happy to see you all. Happy to see you all. Familiar faces. Anna, Urs. Hello, Urs. Mary, Elvis. That's right. And there it is. Everybody, goodbye. And Mary Ellen's computer, have a computer back. Thank you, darlings. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. That's it. And I'll go home now.